I was standing there at my daughter's graduation, surrounded by proud families, teachers, friends, and parents, and for a brief moment, I thought my heart would explode with joy. Then she took the microphone, her voice shaking a little, but filled with determination, and she said words that cut deeper than anything I had ever heard in my life. She said, "My stepdad gave me a car, my real dad never did." The room went silent, my chest tightened, my legs felt weak, and I swear the world around me blurred as if every single pair of eyes turned in my direction. In that instant, I was no longer a proud father. I was the man who had just been erased from his own daughter's heart. It felt like the ground opened beneath me, and I was falling endlessly into a darkness I could not escape. You see, what nobody in that auditorium knew, what even my daughter did not know, was that behind my quiet presence there was a secret, a truth hidden for years, a story that would change the way she saw me forever. But before I tell you how everything unfolded, before I reveal what happened after that shocking moment, I need to ask something from you. Right now we are working hard to grow this community and share more stories like this one, stories that will break your heart and make you think deeply. So I want to invite you to help us reach our goal of 200,000 subscribers here on this channel. Your subscription means the world because it keeps these stories alive. It gives us the chance to keep telling truths that often stay buried in silence. So please hit that button and join us. Now back to that moment on the stage. Imagine being told by your own child in front of hundreds of people that you were never there. Imagine the weight of being reduced to nothing more than a shadow while another man was celebrated as the real father. I wanted to scream. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to tell everyone in that room that the words she spoke were not the full story, but instead I froze, because in her eyes, in that single sentence she had already chosen who mattered most. I felt small. I felt invisible, but deep inside me I knew that one day the truth would come out, and that day had finally arrived. Because hidden in my home, tucked away in an old folder, were documents, letters, and proof that I had never stopped giving, proof that I had sacrificed more than anyone ever knew. And if she could see them, if she could read my words and understand the nights I went hungry just to make sure she had something, if she could finally see past the lies, then maybe, just maybe, she would know who I really was. Not the man described by others, not the father painted as absent and careless, but the father who had always been there, even if hidden in the shadows. This is not just my story. This is the story of how a father can be erased from his daughter's life by manipulation, by comparison, and by silence. It is the story of how love can be twisted into something unrecognizable, and how the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to rise. And it all began years before that graduation, when small moments of distance turned into walls, and those walls became mountains between us. And now I am going to take you back with me to those years to show you how it all started, and how each step, each word, each action built up to the day when my daughter stood on that stage and spoke the words that shattered me completely. After that graduation moment, when my world seemed to collapse, I could not help but remember the years that had led us there, years where my love was tested again and again, years where every step I took toward my daughter felt like it was being erased before her eyes. You have to understand, when she was born, I made a silent promise to her while holding her tiny hand for the very first time. I promised that no matter what happened in my life, no matter what obstacles came my way, she would always have me. She would always know that her father was present, that he cared, that he loved her more than his own breath. And for a while I lived up to that promise with joy. I fed her, I played with her, I stayed awake during nights of fever and tears. I sang to her, I built little castles with her toys, and I thought that bond was unbreakable. But life has a way of tearing dreams apart. The marriage between me and her mother began to crumble. Small arguments turned into big fights, and those big fights poisoned the house with silence and bitterness. Eventually the love that once united us broke, and we went through the painful process of divorce. It was not just papers, it was not just signatures, it was the slow ripping apart of a family, and in that tearing I lost something even greater than a marriage. I lost the everyday moments with my daughter. After the divorce, her mother married again, and suddenly, there was another man in the picture, someone who carried himself with confidence, someone who had money, someone who knew how to impress a child with big gifts and flashy gestures. At first, I tried to tell myself it was fine as long as my daughter was happy, I could accept it, but slowly I began to see how he was taking every space that belonged to me. He was there at school meetings, sitting in the front row, speaking loudly, while I was pushed to the back. He was there with brand new toys, while the gifts I bought with my limited savings sat untouched in the corner. He was there with big words, calling himself a father figure, while I was reduced to the title of real dad, but somehow never enough dad. The truth is, I was not perfect. I did not have much. I worked long hours, sometimes more than one job. I counted every coin to make sure I could send the child support payment and still have enough to eat. And there were nights I went to bed hungry, nights I wore the same clothes for weeks just so I could stretch my money a little further. But I never missed a payment. I never stopped trying. I never stopped showing up. And yet it felt like no one noticed, no one cared. I still remember one afternoon I surprised my daughter with a second-hand bicycle I had found. It was not shiny, it was not new, but I had cleaned it, fixed it, painted it with my own hands, and when I gave it to her, her eyes lit up. For a brief moment my heart soared because I saw her joy. But then just a week later the stepdad rolled in with a brand new bike, the kind that sparkled with polished chrome and expensive wheels, and suddenly mine was forgotten. It leaned against the garage wall collecting dust, and every time I visited I saw it there abandoned, a painful symbol of how I was being replaced. There was another day when I picked her up for ice cream. It was simple, just a cone in a small shop with old chairs and faded paint, but she laughed. She told me stories from school. She looked happy. Then that night her mother posted pictures online of my daughter with the stepdad at a fancy restaurant, smiling under bright lights with plates that cost more than what I made in a week. My ice cream moment disappeared, overshadowed by their show of wealth. Little by little it became a pattern. Everything I tried to do was overshadowed by something bigger, louder, richer, and in those moments I started to feel like I was disappearing, not just from her daily life, but from her memory, as if all the sacrifices I made were erased, replaced with shiny distractions. The hardest part was how she began to look at me with eyes that no longer held the same light she once had when she was a child, when she would run to me, arms wide open, calling me daddy. Those days faded, and in their place was a look that felt distant, almost polite, as if I was just a visitor, someone she had to endure for a few hours until she could return to her real life. Sometimes I asked myself, was I truly failing her? Was I not enough? Had I made mistakes so great that she had reason to believe I never gave her anything? And every time that doubt crept in, I would open the old folder in my closet and remind myself, no, I did give. I gave everything I had. I gave more than anyone could see. But even with those reminders, the pain never left. It sat inside my chest, heavy and suffocating. The pain of being invisible to your own child, the pain of watching another man be celebrated for things you wanted to give, but could not afford, the pain of being erased while still alive. And yet I kept going because I told myself one day she would see the truth, one day she would know the kind of father I really was, and that hope, even if it was small, kept me alive, through the silence, through the humiliation, through every single moment where I felt like nothing more than a ghost. And that is how the years passed, quietly, painfully, invisibly, and each passing year only brought us closer to the day of the graduation, the day when all that pain would come crashing into the open. Through all those years of silence and humiliation, through all the moments when I felt erased and forgotten, there was one thing that gave me strength, a single folder hidden deep in the back of my closet. It was old, the edges worn, the papers inside yellowing with time, but to me it was the most valuable thing I owned, because inside that folder was proof that I had never abandoned my daughter, proof that I had sacrificed more than she would ever know, proof that the words one day thrown at me, "You never gave me anything," were not just wrong, but cruelly unfair. I can still see it now, the way the folder looked sitting between stacks of clothes and boxes of forgotten items. At times, I would pull it out late at night when the house was quiet and no one could hear me, and I would go through the papers one by one. I would see the bank receipts, months and months of deposits for her support money that cost me sleep and food, but I never once missed. I would unfold the letters carefully written by my hand on cheap paper. Letters filled with words of love, encouragement, stories about my day, and dreams I had for her future. Letters I gave to her mother to deliver, but that never reached her hands. There were even little drawings I made when she was still small, silly sketches of us at the park or holding hands, reminders that I wanted her to keep a piece of me even when I was not there, but they never made it to her either, all of them locked away in that folder, hidden like my very existence. The most important thing inside, though, was the deed to a small piece of land, a modest lot far from luxury, but bought with every ounce of effort I had put it under her name, because I wanted her to grow up one day and know that no matter how little I had, I still wanted to give her something permanent, something that showed my love was not just words, it was sacrifice written into reality. Every time I looked at that deed, I thought about how one day I would give it to her, perhaps on her 18th birthday, perhaps on her wedding day, perhaps when she needed to know more than ever that her father had always believed in her. But as the years went on and her distance from me grew stronger, I became afraid that giving it to her would not heal the wound. I feared she would reject it, see it as too little, too late. So I kept it hidden, waiting for the right moment, a moment that for so long never seemed to come. Sometimes I imagined showing it to her in private, telling her quietly away from the eyes of others, but then I would lose my courage, because what if she turned away? What if she refused to believe me? What if she thought I was trying to buy her love like he always did, with flashy gifts? That was never my goal. My love was not for sale. It was not about being bigger or better. It was about being true. But how could I make her understand that when every story she heard about me was painted in the darkest colors? And so the folder remained my silent witness, my secret ally, a collection of truths waiting in the dark while I lived each day carrying the weight of lies. I would watch her celebrate milestones with a stepdad smiling with him in photos, gifts in her hands, laughter on her face, and I would feel that ache inside me grow, but I would remind myself quietly, one day the folder will speak, one day the truth will be seen. What I did not know back then, what I could never have predicted, was that the day of her graduation would become that very moment, the day when silence would no longer be possible, the day when I would be forced to open that folder in front of everyone and finally reveal what had been hidden for so many years. And as I sat in that auditorium listening to her words tearing into me, my mind went immediately to that folder. I imagined it sitting in the closet at home, waiting patiently for me to be strong enough to show her, and in that moment of humiliation, I realized the time had finally come. To understand how everything fell apart, to understand why my daughter could one day stand in front of a crowd and erase me with a single sentence, I need to take you back to where it all began, back to the days when life still held pieces of joy, before the silence, before the distance, before the shadows took over. When she was born, I felt something inside me shift forever, holding her for the first time, her tiny fingers wrapping around mine, her cries echoing in the hospital room. I knew my life had changed. I whispered promises into her ear, promises that no matter how hard things got, I would always be there, I would always protect her, and those promises felt unbreakable. At first, the marriage with her mother was filled with laughter and dreams. We were young and full of plans. We imagined a house filled with love. We imagined watching her grow together, but reality is not always kind. Stress crept in, money was short, and the cracks in our relationship began to spread. Small disagreements about bills, about work, about time slowly turned into heated arguments, then into long silences, heavy and suffocating. I tried to hold on. I tried to believe that love would be enough to fix the cracks, but it wasn't. Eventually, the fights became unbearable, words sharper than knives, and the house that was supposed to be filled with love became filled with resentment and slammed doors. We reached the point where the only solution seemed to be separation, and so we signed the papers that cut our family in half. And though I told myself it was for the best, deep inside I knew that I'd just lost more than a wife. I had lost the daily closeness with my daughter. After the divorce, I would see her only on certain weekends. I counted the days. I waited like a child for those moments. And when she was finally with me, I tried to squeeze an entire lifetime of love into a few short hours. We would go to the park, play games, watch cartoons, eat cheap pizza, anything to make her smile. But as soon as it began, it ended, and she was gone again, leaving me with silence and an empty apartment. Then came the day her mother introduced a new man into her life. He was confident, he had money, he had the kind of presence that made people notice him. And at first I wanted to be civil. I told myself, if he was kind to my daughter, then it would be fine. But slowly I started to see how he stepped into spaces that belonged to me. At first it was subtle little things like picking her up from school, then attending events, then giving her gifts, then sitting in the front row of her life while I was pushed further and further back. The hardest part was not what he did, but how her mother supported it. She would tell me things like, she needs stability, she needs someone who can provide more than you can, and each time she said it I felt smaller, like I was being erased piece by piece. She would not give my letters, she would not tell my daughter about the sacrifices I made. Instead, she painted me as someone who was barely present, someone who only appeared when it was convenient. I can still remember the first time I noticed a change in my daughter's eyes. She had always run to me, arms wide, calling me daddy, but one day when I went to pick her up, she walked slowly, she looked down, and when she hugged me it felt polite, not joyful. It felt like she was doing it because she had to, not because she wanted to. That moment broke me in ways I cannot fully explain. It was like watching a door close slowly while I stood helpless on the other side. Time moved on, and the distance grew bigger. Little by little, her laughter with me was softer, her excitement was less, her attention was divided, and more it leaned toward the man who could offer her what I could not. He could buy her expensive toys, he could take her to shiny places, he could present himself as the hero, while I struggled to pay bills and bring her small gifts. I knew love was not about money, but in her young heart the contrast between us was too obvious. I remember one school play, she was so excited to perform, and I sat in the back rows with flowers I bought from a street vendor. I waved at her, but her eyes searched the crowd until they landed on him sitting in the front row with a bouquet twice the size, and when she smiled at him my heart sank, because in that smile, I saw myself disappearing. These little moments built a wall between us, a wall I could not climb no matter how hard I tried. I shouted across it with my love, with my efforts, but the echoes never reached her. She only heard the voices telling her that her stepdad was the real provider, the real father, and that her biological dad was just a shadow. Those years shaped her perception of me. Those years planted seeds that later bloomed into the words she spoke at her graduation, words that cut so deep because they were rooted in years of manipulation and distance. And as much as it hurt to remember these moments, I knew I had to face them. I knew I had to carry them in my story, because without them, no one could ever truly understand the weight of the silence that fell on that stage when she said, "I never gave her anything." And it was in those years, in the quiet pain of watching her slip away, that I began to keep the folder that became my silent proof, my secret voice, my hope that one day, when the lies were too heavy, the truth could finally rise. The folder sat in my drawer, growing thicker with each passing month, like a silent witness to my struggle. At first, it was just small things, receipts from toys I bought, pictures of us together, little notes she scribbled on napkins, drawings she left behind in my apartment. I kept them because I was terrified of forgetting, terrified that one day the lies would erase me, not only from her memory, but from mine too. And I wanted to hold on to every fragment of proof that I had been there, that I had tried. But as time moved forward, the tension between me and her mother grew sharper, like glass under bare feet. She accused me of not being present. She accused me of neglect. She told others that I never supported my daughter, that I chose to disappear, and each word stabbed deeper, because I knew the truth was the opposite. I worked long hours to pay child support. I skipped meals to save for her birthdays. I walked home in the rain because I gave my last few dollars to buy her a gift, but none of that mattered, because the story being told was that I was absent, and slowly people believed it. There were times I would show up for her school events, and her mother would turn her back, refusing to acknowledge me, as if I were a stranger. One time I heard her whisper to someone beside her, "Don't worry, he won't stay long." And I felt my chest tighten, my heart screaming that this was my daughter too, that no one could take that away from me. But the truth was, in the eyes of others, I was already fading. The stepfather became more involved. He coached her soccer team. He sat in the front row at her recitals. He was the one other parents recognized as her dad. I was the shadow standing behind, watching quietly. And when teachers spoke to me, they seemed surprised that I was even around. Their words, polite but distant. "Oh, you are her father." I did not know. I felt invisible. My daughter began to pull away more and more. I would call her phone, and she would answer with short, distracted words. Sometimes she would not answer at all when I asked about school. She would say fine when I asked about her day. She would say nothing much. The conversations that once flowed like rivers became drops of water, barely enough to quench my desperate thirst for connection. I tried to hide my pain. I tried to stay calm. But each time I hung up the phone, I felt another piece of me break. And yet I never stopped. I sent her letters. I left messages. I showed up when I could, even when I was not welcome, even when people looked at me like I was intruding. I kept going because I believed one day she would see, one day she would understand. The folder became my lifeline. I added court documents that showed the payments I made. I added emails that proved I asked for more visitation. I added photos of us together on the weekends. I added birthday cards I bought her that she never received because her mother threw them away. I added anything that could one day speak for me when my voice was silenced. I remember one particular night, I sat alone at my kitchen table staring at the folder, my hands shaking. I thought about giving up. I thought maybe it would be easier to walk away. Maybe she would be happier without me trying. Maybe the pain of rejection would fade if I stopped. But then I looked at a small picture inside the folder. It was of her when she was 5 years old, her smile wide, her arms around my neck, her eyes shining with pure trust. And I knew I could not stop. I knew I had to keep fighting even if no one believed me. The tension escalated when the stepfather began to openly challenge me. One afternoon, I arrived to pick her up, and he stood at the door, arms crossed, blocking my way. He told me she did not want to go with me. He told me I should stop forcing her and let her decide. My heart pounded. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight. But I looked at her standing behind him, her eyes uncertain, her body frozen, and I knew that if I made a scene, it would only make things worse. So I swallowed my pride. I smiled, and I said, "It is okay, sweetie, maybe next time," and I walked away, my chest burning. But inside I raged at the unfairness. I raged at being painted as the villain when all I wanted was to be her father. I raged that every effort I made was twisted into a weapon against me, and in that rage I clung tighter to the folder because it was the only thing that could not lie, the only thing that could not be taken from me. There were nights when I would sit awake imagining the future. I imagined her wedding day. I imagined myself sitting in the back row, ignored while he walked her down the aisle. I imagined birthdays where my name was not mentioned, graduations where I was invisible. My mind tormented me with visions of being erased completely. But each time I thought of giving, and I would open the folder, flip through the pages, and remind myself that the truth was still alive, even if hidden. The pressure grew heavier when people in the community began to talk, whispers behind my back. Oh, he never cared. Oh, he was never around. Some even told me directly, maybe it is better this way. Maybe she has a real father now. And those words burned like fire because they dismissed years of sacrifice. They dismissed the love that consumed me. They dismissed my very existence. And yet I endured because I had hope. I endured because I believed that no lie lasts forever. I endured because I trusted that the truth locked inside my folder would one day find light. As she grew into a teenager, the distance turned into walls of steel. She stopped calling, she stopped answering, she stopped visiting. And when I did see her, she barely looked at me, her words cold, her hugs quick. I tried to reach her with stories of when she was little. I tried to remind her of the games we played, the songs we sang, the moments we laughed. But she looked at me with eyes that said those memories no longer mattered. The tension was no longer silent. It was sharp, it was visible, it was unbearable. And I realized that I was no longer fighting for weekends or phone calls. I was fighting for my identity as her father. I was fighting for the truth of who I was and who I had been. And all the while the folder waited, silent, patient, heavy with proof, heavy with hope. And I knew deep inside that one day that folder would either save me, or it would be the last thing I had left to remind me that I tried, that I fought, that I loved. The day of her graduation arrived, and I remember standing outside the school building, my hands sweating, my chest tight. I had waited years for this moment. I wanted to see her walk across that stage. I wanted to see her in that cap and gown, smiling like she had conquered the world. But deep down I feared what the day would bring, because I knew how distant she had become. I knew how invisible I had been made. The auditorium filled with families cheering, clapping, cameras flashing. I sat in the back row alone because no one saved me a seat. I watched her mother in the front row, dressed in bright colors, surrounded by friends. I saw the stepfather sitting proudly beside her, smiling as if the day belonged to him. I sank into my chair, praying that at least for a brief moment she would look for me, that her eyes would find me in the crowd. When her name was called, she walked across the stage, tall and graceful, her face glowing with pride. I clapped until my hands burned. I shouted her name, even though my voice was lost in the roar of the crowd. And for a second, she glanced toward the audience. My heart leaped, but then her gaze moved away quickly, as if she had not seen me at all, and the emptiness returned heavier than before. After the ceremony, the principal stepped to the microphone and announced that one student had prepared a special speech to close the ceremony. My breath caught when I heard her name. She was the one chosen to speak. The crowd erupted with applause. Her mother beamed. Her stepfather patted her shoulder. And I sat frozen, wondering what she would say. She walked to the podium, her cap slightly tilted, her hair brushing her shoulders, her voice strong and steady. She thanked her teachers, she thanked her friends, she thanked her mother for always being there, she thanked her stepfather for stepping up and being the father she never had. The words cut through me like a blade, sharp and merciless. I gripped the edge of my seat, my throat dry, my heart pounding in my ears. She spoke about the sacrifices her mother made, how she worked tirelessly to support her. She spoke about the guidance of her stepfather, how he taught her discipline and kindness, how he believed in her dreams. And then she said the words that shattered me completely. She said, "I would not be who I am today without you, Dad." And she turned her eyes toward him, not me. The auditorium cheered. People clapped louder than before, and I sat in silence, feeling my soul leave my body. I wanted to stand, I wanted to shout that it was not true, that I had been there, that I had loved her since the day she was born, that I had fought through storms and fire just to remain in her life. But no words came, only tears sliding down my face, silent, invisible, just like me. As she finished her speech, the crowd rose to their feet, giving her a standing ovation. I rose too, but not out of pride, out of instinct, my legs weak, my hands trembling. I clapped softly, my eyes fixed on her, hoping that at the very least she would notice me even for a second. But she never looked my way. She smiled at her mother, she hugged her stepfather, she waved to friends. But I was not in her world, not anymore. I walked out of the auditorium before the crowd emptied. I could not bear to see them surround her with congratulations. I could not bear to see the family photo with me missing. I stepped into the hallway, my chest aching. I leaned against the wall, struggling to breathe, every word of her speech replaying in my mind, each one carving deeper into the wound that would not heal. Outside, the sky was overcast, the air heavy with summer heat. I stood alone in the parking lot, watching families laugh and embrace around me, fathers lifting daughters, mothers taking pictures, siblings cheering. I felt like a ghost drifting among the living, unseen, unheard, unwanted. I wanted to scream at the sky. I wanted to demand why after all I had given, after all I had endured, why was I erased? Why was my love invisible? But then I remembered the folder waiting at home, filled with the truth, filled with proof, filled with my fight. And my hope. I thought maybe one day she would open it, maybe one day she would read the letters, see the photos, see the sacrifices, and understand. Maybe one day she would stand at another podium, another milestone, and remember me. As I drove home, my vision blurred with tears, I whispered to myself over and over, I was there, I was there, I was there, as if saying it enough times would keep the truth alive, as if it would somehow echo into her heart across the walls that had been built between us. That night, I placed the graduation program into the folder. I wrote the date on the corner, and I whispered to the folder, "You are all I have left. You are my voice. You are my witness. One day you will speak for me. One day she will know." And though my heart felt broken beyond repair, I held on to that fragile thread of hope, because without it I was nothing. After the graduation night, something inside me cracked wide open. I had carried years of silence, years of being ignored, years of being painted as less than, and I always swallowed it down because I told myself she would see the truth one day, she would know who I really was. But that speech, that public declaration of who she thought her father was and who she thought I was, destroyed the last pieces of my patience. I could not keep pretending, I could not keep bleeding quietly while everyone clapped for the lie. I sat in my small apartment, the folder open on the table, every letter, every photo, every legal paper spread before me like pieces of a puzzle that only I seemed to recognize. I stared at her handwriting in the old birthday cards she had written to me when she was little, the ones that said, "Daddy, I love you," the ones that had hearts and stick figure drawings. Those tiny notes were proof that once upon a time, I was everything to her. How did it change so completely? How did I go from being the center of her world to being erased like chalk in the rain? I thought about confronting her directly, but every attempt I had made in the past ended with doors closed in my face or calls that went unanswered. Her mother had built walls so high around her that I was like a shadow trying to climb glass, and every time I reached out I was painted as desperate or bitter. But that night something shifted in me. I was no longer afraid of being called names. I was no longer afraid of being seen as the villain I was already treated that way anyway. So what did I have to lose? The next day I drove to her school parking lot. I waited by my car until she came out. I saw her walking with friends, laughing carefree, as if the speech had been the highlight of her life. I stepped forward and said her name. My voice shook, but I forced it louder. She froze when she saw me. Her smile faded. Her friends glanced awkwardly and gave her space. She walked toward me slowly, her eyes guarded, like I was a stranger. I said, "I just want 5 minutes to tell you something." She sighed and crossed her arms. She said, "Make it quick, Dad." Her tone flat. The word dad sounded foreign on her tongue, like it no longer belonged to me. I told her I had a folder with everything she never knew. I said inside our letters, cards, photos, court documents, proof of how hard I fought to stay in her life, proof of how much I sacrificed. She shook her head and said, "Mom told me all about you. Mom said you left us. Mom said you gave up." Those words pierced deeper than knives. I felt my knees weaken. I said, "No, that is not the truth," and I begged her, "Please just take the folder, read it when you are ready. You do not have to believe me now, but one day you will want to know. And when that day comes, the truth will be waiting." She looked at me with eyes that had already been taught not to trust me. She whispered, "I already have a dad, and he is not you." Then she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, clutching the folder to my chest. My heart shattered again, but beneath the shattering was fire, a fire I had never felt before. I realized this was my breaking point. No more silence. No more hiding behind fear. I could not let the story of my life be written by others. I had to fight louder, stronger than ever, even if it cost me everything. I went home and wrote a long letter addressed to her. A letter I placed inside the folder. I wrote every memory, every sacrifice, every sleepless night. I wrote about holding her when she was sick, about teaching her to ride a bike, about working extra hours to pay for her school trips. I wrote about how her mother twisted the truth, how she painted me as a coward when I had been a warrior. I wrote about the day in court when I begged the judge for more time and was denied. I wrote about how none of it ever changed the way I loved her, and how nothing ever would. As I sealed the folder, I whispered to it again, "You will be my voice. When I no longer have strength, you will be the truth. When lies surround her, you will be the proof. When she finally opens her heart again." That night, I did not sleep. I sat by the window watching the city lights blur. Through my tears, I felt broken, but I also felt alive in a strange way, because the pain had forced me to a place where I could not go back. I had crossed a line inside myself. There was no more pretending. There was only the truth, and the fight to make sure it was not buried. The breaking point was not just about losing her, it was about losing the fear that had kept me chained for years, and though I did not know what would come next, I knew I would not stop. I could not stop. The day came when the folder could no longer stay hidden. It had been sitting on my table like a living thing, whispering to me, reminding me of everything inside. And one evening, after weeks of silence, she showed up at my door. It was raining outside, her hair wet, her eyes swollen from crying, and she held the folder in her hands like it was something heavy, something almost burning. She looked at me, and for the first time in years, her voice trembled when she said, "I read it." My chest tightened. I could not move. I just stood there staring at her like the girl I once held in my arms had returned, even if only for a moment. She stepped inside without waiting for me to answer and placed the folder on the table. She said, "Why did you never tell me all this? Why did you let me believe you just walked away?" I swallowed hard and said, "Because every time I tried, your mother made sure you never heard me, because the courts did not listen, because letters I sent were returned unopened, Because I thought one day you would come to me on your own, and now here you are." She sat down and opened the folder again, her fingers trembling as she pulled out a letter. She read my words aloud, the ones I had written years ago. "Daddy loves you more than anything in the world. I will always fight for you no matter what, and I promise that one day you will understand." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "I do not remember ever seeing this. I never knew you wrote me so many letters. I never knew you kept every drawing, every card I made. I thought you did not care." Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her hands, and for the first time in years I touched her shoulder gently, afraid she would pull away. But she did not. She leaned into me like the child I remembered. She said, "Mom told me you forgot my birthdays, that you never sent gifts, that you never showed up." And I said I showed up every single time. I waited outside when I was not allowed, and I left gifts on the porch. I kept receipts, I kept photographs, because I knew one day I would need proof. I pulled out the court documents, showed her the petitions I had filed for more visitation, the rejected requests, the bills for lawyers, the endless attempts that went nowhere. She traced her finger over the judge's stamp like it was something out of a nightmare. She whispered, "I cannot believe this. I cannot believe I spent all these years hating you when you were fighting for me the whole time." The room was silent except for her sobs and the sound of rain hitting the windows, and in that silence something shifted between us, something fragile and painful but real. She finally saw me not as the villain, not as the absent father, but as the man who had been erased from her story. She asked, "Why did Mom lie? Why would she do this?" And I said, "Because sometimes people are so broken that they would rather destroy others than face their own pain, because control can feel like love even when it is poison." She shook her head over and over, saying, "I feel like my whole childhood was stolen from me. I feel like I never even knew the truth." I told her that the truth was here now, that we could not change the past, but we could build something new if she wanted to, and she looked at me with eyes that were no longer guarded but raw and vulnerable, and said, "I want to know everything, tell me everything." So I told her about the day she was born, how I held her tiny hand and promised to always protect her. I told her about teaching her to ride a bike, how she fell and scraped her knee, and I kissed it better. I told her about nights I worked late shifts just to afford her dance classes, how I stood in the back of every recital clapping until my hands hurt. I told her about the fights with her mother, about the way she twisted my words, about how helpless I felt when the law did not see me. I poured it all out, every memory, every sacrifice, every scar. And she listened, she cried, she asked questions, she held the letters like treasures she never knew she had, and with each word, with each piece of proof, the walls her mother had built around her heart began to crumble. I could see it in her eyes, the recognition, the ache, the realization that she had been living inside a lie, and now the truth was flooding and unstoppable. When she finally looked at me again, her face streaked with tears, she whispered, "I am so sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. I believed it all." And I shook my head and said, "You have nothing to be sorry for. You were a child. You trusted the people who raised you. The blame is not yours. The only thing that matters now is that you know the truth." She reached across the table and took my hand, her grip tight, like she was afraid I might disappear again. She said, "I want you in my life. I want to start over. I do not care what anyone says anymore. You are my father, and nothing will change." That my throat closed and I could barely speak, but I managed to whisper, "I never stopped being your father, not for a single day." That night the folder was no longer just paper, it was life, it was truth, it was the bridge between us. And for the first time in years, hope flickered inside me, fragile but burning. I knew the war was not over. Her mother would not let go easily, the lies would not vanish overnight. But the revelation had happened, the truth had broken through, and once the truth is seen, it can never be unseen. The next day, I went with her to her mother's house, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands sweaty, my mind racing with every possible outcome. She clutched my hand as we walked up the steps, the folder tucked under her arm like armor. When the door opened, I could feel the tension vibrating in the air. Her mother looked surprised, her eyes flicked to the folder and narrowed. She said, "What are you doing here?" My daughter took a deep breath and said, "We need to talk. We are not leaving until this is settled." And I could see the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had once been mine. She opened the folder slowly, pulling out letters, photos, and court documents. She said, "You told me so many lies all these years. You told me my father abandoned me. You told me he never cared. You painted him as the villain. And I believed you, but here it all is. Here is the truth that you tried to hide." And I could see the realization hitting her like a blow. Her face paled, her voice trembled. She whispered, Why did I do this? Why did I make him disappear?" And my daughter looked at her and said, "You have spent years lying to me, telling me my father never loved me when he loved me more than anyone ever could. He fought for me, he sacrificed for me, he was always there, and now I know it, and you lied to me." Her mother tried to speak, but my daughter held up the folder like a shield. She said, "Do not even try to justify it. Do not even say anything. I trusted you, and you destroyed my relationship with my father for your own reasons." And I could see the fear in her mother's eyes as the truth hit her full force. My daughter continued, "I know everything. I have read every letter, every photo, every court document, everything you tried to hide. You cannot take this away from me anymore. I see him for who he really is. And I will not let you erase him from my life ever again. The stepfather appeared in the doorway. He looked confused and angry, and my daughter turned to him too. She said, "You cannot replace him, you cannot erase him. He is my father, the only father I have ever had. He may not have had the flashy gifts, he may not have shown up in the way you wanted everyone to see, but he was always there, always fighting for me, always loving me." And for the first time he realized that nothing he could do could overwrite the bond we share. Her mother backed away, unable to respond. I could see the shame and anger and fear all mixed together on her face. I felt a strange mixture of triumph and relief because finally the years of lies and manipulation were exposed. Finally, the truth was out in the open, and my daughter was reclaiming what had always belonged to her, the love of her real father. My daughter turned to me, tears streaming down her cheeks, and whispered, thank you for never giving up. Thank you for always loving me even when I could not see it." I reached for her hand and said, "I will never give up. I will always be here no matter what." And she leaned into me, hugging me like she had never done before, wrapping her arms tight around me, and I held her back tighter than I had held anyone in years. The confrontation ended with her mother silent, her stepfather powerless, and my daughter finally free to see the man who had loved her more than anything. The folder sat on the table, a witness to all the sacrifices, all the pain, and now all the victory, and I knew in that moment that nothing could ever erase what had been revealed. The truth was no longer hidden. The bond between father and daughter was stronger than any lie, stronger than any manipulation, and I could feel a weight lift off my chest, a weight that had been there for years, decades even. As we left the house, my daughter squeezed my hand and whispered, "Let us start over." And I smiled through my tears because finally the fight was not about proving anything to anyone else. It was about us. It was about the father and daughter we were always meant to be. And I knew that no matter what challenges came next, we would face them together because the truth had been revealed and nothing could undo it. The climax was not just about exposing the lies, it was about reclaiming what had been stolen. It was about showing that love cannot be erased, it cannot be hidden, it cannot be replaced. And as we walked down the street together, I could feel the years of pain slowly transforming into hope, into a future that was finally ours. After the confrontation, the world felt different, as if a heavy curtain had been lifted, and for the first time in years, I could breathe freely. My daughter and I walked side by side, our hands intertwined like no time had ever passed, though so many years had been stolen from us. Her eyes sparkled with recognition and understanding, and I could feel her trust slowly returning to its rightful place. Her mother avoided us after that day. She did not answer calls, she did not try to reach out, and though part of me wished for reconciliation, I knew some wounds were too deep to be healed quickly. What mattered was that my daughter finally knew the truth, that she finally knew me. The stepfather attempted to maintain control, but it was useless. My daughter would no longer accept lies or manipulation, and she made it clear that our bond could not be replaced. We spent weeks going through the folder together, reading letters I had written when she was small, photos of birthdays that were never celebrated together, drawings she had made that were tucked away. All of it became a bridge between us, a living history of love that had survived despite the obstacles, despite the silence, despite the pain. I watched her eyes fill with realization and sometimes disbelief. She asked questions about why I never gave up, why I kept fighting. I told her, because nothing could ever erase my love for her, and she nodded, understanding in a way only a child who has finally discovered the truth can. Friends and family began to notice the change in her too. She smiled more, she laughed freely. She spoke of me without hesitation or fear. She introduced me proudly to teachers and neighbors as her father, not as the man she used to believe had abandoned her. She finally allowed me to be part of her world, without walls, without lies, without fear. And I felt a peace I had never known before, a weight lifted off my chest, because for the first time our story was being told correctly. Though the past could not be undone, the consequences of truth brought a new beginning for us. My daughter began to ask me about my life, my thoughts, my experiences. She wanted to hear the stories that had been hidden. She wanted to know the man behind the sacrifices. And I shared everything I could, every lesson, every regret, every victory. And each time I spoke, she listened with the intensity of someone rediscovering a long-lost treasure. I realized that the aftermath of revelation is not just relief, it is responsibility. It is building trust that was broken. It is showing up every day, proving that the love that has survived is real and consistent. And I committed myself to being there in every way possible, not to fill the voids of the past, but to walk with her in the present and the future, creating memories that would never be erased. The folder, which had been my secret ally, became our shared treasure. It remained on the table in her room, and sometimes at night, She would pull it out and read letters aloud, or look at photos. I never forced her to keep it open or dwell on the past. She chose to, because it was part of her history, part of who she was, and I knew that by preserving it we were also preserving the connection that had been denied to us for so long. As weeks turned into months, our relationship strengthened. The emotional scars lingered, but they became a reminder of endurance and love, and I felt gratitude that we had arrived at this place of honesty and connection. My daughter would call me first. When something happened, she would confide in me, she would seek advice, and sometimes she would just sit silently beside me, sharing presence without words, and each of these moments became proof that the consequences of truth are powerful when they allow healing to take root. And though her mother and the stepfather still played roles in her life, they could no longer dictate her perception of me or our bond. The truth had been revealed, the lies had been exposed, and nothing could undo the reclamation of a relationship that was always meant to exist. The aftermath was not only relief, it was reclamation, it was freedom, and the chance to live in honesty finally. As I sit here thinking about everything that has happened, I realize that life can be unfair, cruel, even devastating, but love, even when tested by lies and absence, can survive, it can endure, and in our case, it can triumph. My daughter and I have spent years apart, years defined by misunderstandings, manipulation, and distance, but the truth once revealed has the power to reconnect, heal, and restore, and I see in her eyes now the trust that was always there, the recognition of a father who never stopped fighting and never stopped loving. I want anyone listening to this story to understand that sometimes life will push you to the edge, that sometimes the people you expect to protect and support you may fail you, that sometimes your love will seem invisible, but if you hold on, if you persist, if you fight quietly and with patience, the truth has a way of rising. The folder in our story was not just paper, it was proof, it was hope, it was the bridge between a lost past and a recovered future, and even when all seems lost, there is a chance for reconciliation and understanding. My daughter and I now speak openly, laugh freely, and rebuild what was once broken. Each day is a gift, each conversation a treasure, each hug a reminder that bonds formed in love cannot truly be destroyed. They can be tested, stretched, and strained, but they endure when nurtured with honesty and persistence. I look at her and see not only the child I once held, but the young woman. She is becoming the woman who can understand the complexities of love, loss, and truth, and the thought fills me with pride, deeper than anything else in the world. Before we end this story, I want to thank you for listening. I hope you understand the power of persistence, the importance of truth, and the unwavering strength of love that refuses to be erased. And I want to ask you, if this story touched you, if it resonated with you, to support this channel, please give a like and subscribe. Your support allows more stories like this to reach hearts and minds. And I also want to let you know that there is another story on the screen now, a story that will move you, inspire you, and remind you of the resilience of the human spirit. So click on it and continue this journey with us. Thank you for spending these moments with me, for witnessing this journey, for feeling the weight of absence and the joy of revelation. And remember, no matter how deep the shadows may seem, the light of truth and love can always find a way to shine.